Greetings, welcome to Halfling 13 Gaming. Today we're starting to paint up a new warband from Mordheim, a unit of dwarf treasure hunters. The first model of the starting crew is a Dwarf Noble, who I'm calling Grimnar Ironhand. The rest of the warband, to include an engineer, 2 troll slayers, and several crossbowmen, will follow. I'm not a professional. I don't paint at competition levels. Some might claim I don't even paint at tabletop standards, though at a certain point any paint is good paint. My process is intended to be easy to follow and easy to repeat, with only some basic skills and colors. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's get started. The model I'm using is a highborn warrior, sculpted by the Beholder Miniatures and available on my mini factory in the Dwarven Kingdom's Highborn Warrior set. See the description below for a link. The specific model is Warrior number 4, armed with an axe and shield. The entire warband comes from the Dwarven Kingdom line to maintain consistency. The materials you'll need for this are simple: some basic paint, some brushes, and a willingness to make mistakes. Although I use Army Painter paints for this model, almost every line has similar or matching colors. I did opt for an airbrush for the zenithal highlighting, but you can achieve similar results with spray cans. For this painting effort, the paints used are as follows: a Wraithbone primer, matte black, white ink from Liquitex, nomad flesh, leather brown, matte white, rough iron, true copper, plate mail metal, yeti white, dragon red, and then some Nuln oil wash from Citadel and apothecary white contrast paint from Citadel. I also used a specialized tool, a Pigma Micron 003 archival pen, when I did the eyes for the model. We start off after the model has been assembled and primed with Citadel Wraithbone spray. The color at this stage really doesn't matter, since I'm not using any contrast paints except for the base, and I'll be applying a zenithal highlight. Since the model is resin, I use super glue on the axe hand for a secure bond. My first real stage is the start of the zenithal highlight, using matte black followed by white ink. The intent of this is to provide highlights from above, so start by spraying the entire model a flat black. Then spray the model from above in white, angling along the side to about 45 degrees. This should give a variation of white from the top, grays on the side, and blacks in the shadows, which in theory should help with the colors later. This is the first time I was using the Liquitex white ink, and I have to say I was rather impressed. I had previously tried airbrush white paint, but it always clogged up in the airbrush. The ink is not only a lot cheaper, but flows well and covers great. If you haven't tried it yet in an airbrush, grab a bottle and give it a go. As to the actual benefits of zenithal, I admittedly think this ended up being wasted time. Since I'm using traditional paints and not contrasts, a lot of the shadows and brightness simply didn't transfer through. Since I use airbrush paints, they're already thinned. I just don't think zenithal really helped here, unless I'd chosen to use contrast paints for the full model. With the base coat of colors done, we start with the actual painting of the model. My strategy when using traditional paints is to paint the model inside out, that is, start with the innermost layers, such as skin, and dress the model working outwards. Thus skin first, then boots, pants, shirt, followed by armor and accessories, before finally weapons and shields. This helps me to minimize mistakes, trying to reach past already painted surfaces, while still following a logical approach. Based on that, we start with nomad flesh for the skin tone, catching the face and arms of the dwarf, and trying to avoid too much onto the beard. The next step is then leather brown, where my approach deviated slightly. The boots are obvious, a quick coat and done, and avoiding the metal armor plates. However, I also did the belt around the waist and straps on the arm, since it was already working with leather. If needed, I would revisit it later for touch-ups. Trying to improve my prior efforts, since this is more of a central figure in the warband, I opted this time to try the eyes. As such, a couple of tiny dots, helped by a magnifying glass, filled in the eyes. As usual, they look comically oversized at this stage. While the eyes dry, we move on to the armor. The dwarf is sculpted with 2 layers, a scale mail underneath the plate mail. For contrast, I opted for 2 different shades. Given the warband name, rough iron is the color of the scale mail pieces, and any equipment used, mainly the axe handle and interior of the shield. This was carefully applied to each section. Time to turn to the overflowing beard. I needed to paint the decorations first, but I didn't want either more iron or silver, and gold seemed a bit too high value for the warband. I opted for true copper instead, covering the insignia on the armor and the bands within the beard. This worked well to contrast with the rest of the metals. For the plate mail pieces, I used plate mail metal for the solid silvery coloring applied to the armor plates, top of the boots, outside of the shield, and business edges of the axe. Although the coverage was decent, I do find that silvery metals work better over a black color first, a step I forgot about during painting. The beard itself was painted in Yeti white due to the age of the dwarf leader. This is an area where a contrast paint likely would have worked well, not only with the sculpted texture of the beard, but also with the highlights, but my goal was only to use standard paints. With most of the model base painted, it was time to return to the eyes. Despite the magnifying glass, I was not confident in my brush ability, so I tried out a technique I had seen elsewhere and pulled out a detailed pen. This is a Pigma Micron 3 with a very fine tip. With some care, it allowed me to add the dot of the eye with minimal fuss, though the eyes were still rather crazy to behold. Trusting my process, I moved on to the top knot on the helmet with a layer of dragon red. This color would be the theme color for the warband, with every model having something to tie them together. And since my other warband is an orc mob, everybody knows that red just goes faster. At this point, all the base coating is done, all the colors are established, and the model is looking good, though perhaps a bit flat. As such, it was time for the Nuln Oil to bring it all together. As usual, Nuln Oil dirties up the model, while settling into the shadows, and provides a lot of variation, especially on metals. However, once dried, I think it may have been a mistake, and I should have used an Army Painter Dark Wash or Dark Tone. Perhaps Nuln Oil doesn't play well with Army Painter metals, but it just didn't have the desired depth as it does when painted over lead belcher. Regardless, I was committed now, so I pressed on. The next step was to go back with some highlights. I wanted to try some edge highlighting, in which I could use the edge of the brush to hit only the highlights, especially on the armor, shield, and beard. I was less than successful here, though. For the metal, the oil had not really darkened enough for the highlights to be visible. For the beard, I tried a different couple of shades, but first ended up with rather leopard spotting, before I eventually toned it down with some of the original Yeti gray as highlights. On the axe, I added a small amount of true copper dry brushing to the axe head to bring out the detail. And then I touched up around the eyes with nomad skin so the dwarf wasn't quite so crazy looking. Between that adjustment and the Nuln Oils, the eyes actually looked fairly decent. The main model was complete now, so I finished off the base. This was a coating of apothecary white contrast over the stone flagstone texture of the base, followed by some Nuln Oil to add more shadows. Then the usual matte black rim color to close out the model. Looking back at the effort, I find that the photos don't really represent the model well. It looks better in person. All the silver plate mail and gray beard just tends to blur together. Overall, I'm happy with the model and results, and look forward to some of the more colorful figures in the warband. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this content, leave a like or subscribe to the channel for more content. We post battle reports where these models will likely make an appearance. If you have any hints, tricks, or techniques to try, leave a comment. I'm willing to experiment a bit, especially on some of the non-Legion models, but also be curious to see your efforts in painting for either this unit or others.